Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Borderlands 3. I played it on the Xbox One, it's also available on the PC and PS4. Let's start with the story. You play as one of 4 new Vault Hunters. I specifically picked Mose, so I was the gunner. And you are basically seeking out the vaults once again, but it's for kind of different reasons, because there's this crazy new, cult called Children of the Vault being led by these two basically influencers. Not even basically, they are influencers. It's like a parody / satire of influencers. Unfortunately for you, they are also seeking the vault, and well, they have an entire army of bandits. They've rounded up all the bandits and got them to work together for them against you. Overall, I enjoyed the story of this game. I like the twists and turns that are happening in the story. Overall, I think it's a well-done story. I think it's a pretty in-depth story for a Borderlands game. They kind of moved more towards that way after the first game. I think the second game would be the highlight in the story element, but pre-sequel not so much. And then, obviously, this one is doing quite well. I will say, regarding some of the writing of the characters, it feels very inconsistent to me. The dialogue and their behavior is how you get the personality of these characters, and characters like Balex really stand out. It's Ice-T voicing a navigation AI. The story you get from, the mission with him is fantastic, and his character is excellent. But then you have ones that are Tiny Tina, who is returning. Obviously, this is an older Tiny Tina, but the character's just not there. Tiny Tina went from being a standout to really honestly disappointing in this game. Let's get into the audio. I'll say this, Borderlands is a very big game, and you're not constantly in a firefight, so that means you're also not constantly hearing music. I would like some more background music, even if it's just soft and gentle in the background. But when there is music, it is very good. It really fits with the atmosphere of what's going on. It works very well with the game. It's good music. As for the voice acting, I think it's very good. It works very well with the game. Characters that need to be over the top are very over the top, and the characters that are more subdued are very well delivered in a much more subdued manner. As for all the weapons, different guns, explosions, vehicles, all of that, the sound effects are excellent. They work very well with the game. They fit the wacky nature of the weapons and the vehicles, which, that can be hard to do. The only real audio complaint I have is that when I would load in the game, the first gun that I had equipped would have no sound. I could rotate to my next gun and that would have sound, and so on down the line, and if I rotated back to the first gun, it would then have sound. So I've got to say, that's kind of weird, but it wasn't ruinous, it wasn't terrible, but it was noticeable because it happened every time. Let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot. This is, once again, a open world, first-person looter shooter. That is the Borderlands bread and butter, and this game is no exception. There are an obscene amount of weapons, shields, grenade mods, etc., etc. But the other thing that this game is an RPG at its core as well. Each of the 4 different characters have their different skill trees, and you can kind of build your character however you want. The more you play, the more skills you can put into different places, etc. And I think the RPG elements work very well in this game, and one of the big changes they made was to the leveling, or at least it seemed like a pretty big difference than the previous games. The leveling felt more balanced between taking down enemies and finishing quests. I will say though, once an enemy becomes even just 1 level lower than you, the amount of XP you get from them is laughable. So it's not like going around killing enemies is a great way of grinding out XP. Each of the different Vault Hunters has their own special abilities. Since I was playing as Mose the Gunner, I got what was called the Iron Bear, which is basically a mini mech suit, and I loved that thing. That thing definitely saved my ass more than a few times. I really enjoyed using it. You can equip 2 different weapons to it. I had the minigun and the rocket launcher once I unlocked the rocket launcher for it. But unfortunately, I do have complaints with some of the mechanics in this game. It being a looter shooter means you are constantly gaining new weapons, new shields, etc., etc. But I ran into a problem that I had run into with Borderlands the pre-sequel, and that is, yes, there are a ton of guns dropping, but 99% of them are just pure trash. So you may find yourself stuck with a weapon that you love, and I say stuck with because it's like 6-7 levels lower than you are. So it's not as good as it could be, but it's better than everything else you found to replace that weapon. I mean, the further you get into the game, it becomes slightly less of a problem, but it still remains a pretty significant problem. Then you've got certain other new features, like they added a mantle ability for when you are jumping, which would be awesome and is almost awesome, except for the fact that there are times where the mantle doesn't fucking work. I was trying to collect a side objective and I could not get the mantle to mantle onto this platform, and then if I fell off I was screwed because then I would have to go and try and remantle. I actually had to try multiple times. It was pretty frustrating, honestly. There were multiple times where I ran into this problem of the mantling just does not work well, and it's kind of obnoxious. I appreciate it as a new mechanic, but I would appreciate it far more if it actually worked all the time. I also felt like there were certain enemies that really kind of slowed down the game. I ran into these two enemies on a mission. They were what are known as anointed in the game, and they would create this shield that would basically mitigate all damage, including had I already poisoned them with corrosive or fire or whatever. If they were in the shield, it would nullify that damage as well as any time I would shoot at them. And the shield lasted for quite a while, so it really drew out this fight against just two enemies that weren't even bosses. Things like that really slowed down the pace of the game. It started to drag a little whenever I had to run into fights like that. Another thing that slows down the pace of the game is that while there are now new planets, the maps are a good size, but they don't have enough fast travel points. I'm not saying you need like 10 fast travel points per map, but I would like a couple, 2 or 3 rather than just the one. The reason for that being, you either have to go back to the beginning of that map or to maybe Sanctuary, which is kind of your hub, in order to deposit all of your loot. You then have to basically rerun the entire map once you go back to finish the mission. It just gets a little old and it starts to really slow down the progress of the game. Speaking of other things that slowed down the progress of the game and would have been benefited by fast travel were the times that I had to click on something for an objective and it just wouldn't allow me to click on it, no matter what. So unfortunately what I would have to do was go back to, say, Sanctuary or someplace like that, and then come back to where I was doing the mission, and then it would work because I would be reloading that map. The other time I had problems similar to that was when there was an NPC I needed to complete an objective and it would get stuck. This happened a few times, not every time that I had an NPC, but it happened a few times and it got frustrating because once again, I would have to fast travel to like a different world, a different map, then fast travel back, then retrack that map, and then the NPC would finally be unstuck because I reloaded the map. Things like that really started to drag on the game. While at its core, it still has a lot of the stuff that makes Borderlands great. I did run into a lot of small things with mechanics and other small glitches that were kind of starting to drag it down. As for the controls though, I have zero complaints with the controls. I felt that they worked very well. They were very precise. Obviously, I pointed out the mantling is a problem, but that's not really a control thing because I didn't find a way to control that. But as for the aiming, the shooting, the moving, the running, the jumping, precision and reaction of the controls, all of that worked very well. I have no complaints with any of that. Lastly, the visuals. This is obviously now on the new generation of consoles, and it looks far better than any of the other Borderlands. The amount of animation in it is far superior. I'm talking like more in-depth facial animations as well as movement animations. Being able to see the way the different characters move and like the different creatures and enemies move, that's all really impressive and it's far better than it ever has been. There's also a lot of different enemies now. I mean, they really kind of doubled it by having, you know, your standard enemies, but then female versions. So there's female psychos, there's female fanatics now, so they doubled that, and even within the females and males, there's different designs for for the characters, and I really appreciate that. I will say that having this game take place over multiple worlds, I don't feel like it adds that much to the story, but visually it adds a lot. It's an excuse for them to have different zones, essentially. You've got like a city zone, you've got your Pandora zone, you've got your like jungle zone, so I think that's a neat way that the game has grown. So overall, what I will say about this game is that if I had a numerical system, this game would be a solid like 7.25 out of 10. Most of the like major reviews are giving this like 9s out of 10, and I just don't agree with that. I had a lot of fun with it, and I will continue playing it because I've always loved Borderlands. It's one of those games that I like to go back and play from time to time. But Borderlands 3 comes in with a lot of issues that don't necessarily ruin the game, but they definitely negatively affect the quality of the game overall. So I will say that I do recommend it, but with the caveat of you gotta wait a few months, maybe a bit more, so that some of this shit can get patched and it can really start working and being the good game that is at the core of it. There's just this fine layer of shit encompassing the core of the good game. So recommended, but wait a few months, maybe wait for a sale. If it comes down to like $50, it would definitely be worth it. If they do that within the next few weeks, definitely do it. Okay, so in the comments below, why don't you tell me who your favorite Borderland character is? Mine used to be Tiny Tina, but new version is kinda ugh. And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share, subscribe. Have a good one.